Your constitutional right to bear arms is, above all, the right to self-defense. Now, when you hear the term self-defense, most Americans today think about things like home invaders, rapists, muggers, robbers, and things like that. But there's another dimension historically and even today to the right to bear arms that often gets overlooked. And what am I talking about? That is defending yourself against wild animal attacks. You see, animal attacks were one of the reasons the Founding Fathers enshrined the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. That's how big a threat wild animals were in early American life. Now still, you might be thinking, animal attacks, Mark? Really? This isn't the 18th century anymore, and I don't live out on the frontier. Sure, but the truth is that many of the same concerns that motivated our founders still exist today. And let's take a look at this neglected aspect of your Second Amendment rights, the right to protect yourself against animal attacks. Hey folks, I'm Mark, and welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. When it comes to the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms, you do not hear much about its role in thwarting animal attacks. But a United States Supreme Court justice raised this exact issue during a landmark Second Amendment case. The year was 2008. The Supreme Court case was the oral argument involving the District of Columbia versus Heller case. During oral argument, you see, DC's attorney, which was arguing for gun control, by the way, argued that the Second Amendment protected only a malicious use of arms. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy then jumped in. Justice Kennedy sounded skeptical of this assertion by the government against the Second Amendment. Justice Kennedy asked, did the Second Amendment really have, quote, nothing to do with the concern of the remote settler to defend himself and his family against hostile Indian tribes and outlaws, wolves and bears and grizzlies and things like that? That was Justice Kennedy. And the lawyer for the District of Columbia, the government, said, nope, that wasn't part of the Second Amendment. But guess what happened? That attorney turned out to be dead wrong, because Justice Kennedy turned out to be right. The Heller case of 2008, as you know from watching this channel, was the case that decided and affirmed the obvious, that the Second Amendment guarantees the individual right to possess and carry arms in case of confrontation. But what kinds of confrontation was the Supreme Court talking about? And should we be talking about in the context of the Second Amendment? Certainly there are confrontations with criminals, that's an obvious. And as Justice Kennedy suggested back in the oral argument of Heller, early settlers also dealt with raids by Native American tribes. But the last part of Kennedy's question usually gets short shrift. You see, Kennedy mentioned, and he was correct to do so, wolves and bears and grizzlies and things like that. Let's look at some of the confrontations with wild animals in early America of the sorts that Anthony Kennedy, as the Supreme Court Justice, was referring to during the Heller case. And then I want to talk about how these animal attacks still occur to this day. Early Americans needed to protect themselves and their food supplies against wild animals. Listen to this account from an early 19th century settler in the state of Indiana. He said, quote, "The rifle procures at certain seasons the only meat we ever taste. It defends our homes from wild animals and saves our cornfields from squirrels and our hen roosts from foxes, from owls, opossums, and other varmints." Now, obviously, guys, you didn't have to live on the frontier to know this to be true. And that's why Founding Father, the author of the Declaration of Independence itself, Thomas Jefferson, once wrote, a friend, that every American ought to be a gunman in order to protect his farm from the ravages of quadrupeds and his country from those of biped invaders. That was Thomas Jefferson, mind you, not me, Thomas Jefferson. Now, back in the early Americas, the wolf was one predator that early Americans used guns against quite frequently. You see, wolves were such a big problem in colonial times that both Massachusetts and South Carolina put out bounties on them. In fact, even after nearly a century, wolves remained such a menace in Massachusetts that parents would not let their children walk outside without a grown-up. out of fear that the wolves would get the kids. One historian of early Vermont tells about how a pack of wolves quickly tore one young woman in pieces and devoured her. The famous naturalist John J. Audubon, the Audubon Society, I presume, John Audubon described wolves attacking two young men in the state of Kentucky. One man managed to escape up a tree. His friend, unfortunately for him, wasn't so lucky. John Audubon wrote that the pack of wolves left his bones scattered around on the snow, which was stained with his blood. Bears, in addition to wolves, also attacked humans. In New Hampshire in 1784, again, within the founding period, to help us understand the meaning of the Second Amendment's text. Okay, in New Hampshire in 1784, a bear grabbed an 8-year-old boy and left only a mangled corpse. The bear had ripped out this kid's throat and devoured his thigh. Now, the famous Lewis and Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition that was sent out west to explore the Louisiana territory that Thomas Jefferson and the United States had purchased from Napoleon Bonaparte and the French. That's Lewis and Clark were sent out on an expedition. Now, Lewis and Clark on their expedition frequently encountered grizzly bears on their cross-continental expedition in the early 1800s. In fact, in one close call we know about their expedition, it took six members of their party, all firing weapons at the same time to take down an attacking bear. You see, this bear withstood 8 bullets before a headshot finally killed it. And Daniel Boone, that's right, the famous Daniel Boone of American lore, he really existed. Daniel Boone, you see, had to fend off all sorts of dangerous animals and humans as well, by the way. In 1780, Daniel Boone and his brother Neddy were returning home to Kentucky through the woods. And Daniel Boone spotted a bear and shot it with his rifle. As Daniel Boone went after the wounded bear, he heard several shots, rifle shots, in the distance. Now, what Daniel Boone did was he found, when he went back, several Shawnee Indians dancing over his brother's beheaded corpse. Daniel ran off to round up a posse. And by the time he returned with his posse, he found a panther, believe it or not, gnawing on Neddy's headless torso. So if you're keeping score about animals at the founding period and attacks and the need for guns, here's what you can. In a single instance involving Daniel Boone, there's a bear, an Indian attack, and a panther all in the same spot. That's why the founders understood the need for firearms and preserved it in the Second Amendment. And of course, this is why the founders thought firearms were essential for all forms of self-defense. And then, of course, there were the rattlesnakes. These rattlesnakes terrified settlers from Europe who had never seen them before in their lives. An English visitor to New England, for example, recounted in the year 1630, that's 1630, the snake stings a man so mortally that he will die within a quarter of an hour. And starting in 1740, Massachusetts organized annual, ready for this, rattlesnake bees, which were community-wide snake hunts. Massachusetts, during our founding. Now you still might be thinking, Mark, have you lost it? I'm not living in colonial times. I don't spend my days in mortal fear of animal attacks. I live in the suburbs. Okay, here's what I'm going to say. That's great. I'm glad that works out for you. We're all very lucky not to face the same exact hardships that many of the early settlers did. I agree with that. But I have to ask, do you really think you're as safe from wild animals as you think you are? Yeah, if you live in a town or a city, you've probably heard about wild animal sightings. Okay, maybe bears were spotted around town, or coyotes, maybe bobcats or mountain lions. Rabid animals, I suppose, can pop up, okay? Happens all the time. In fact, scientists report that more and more wild animals are moving into and around cities and towns. But don't kid yourself. Animals do attack people even today. A recent study shows that animal attack injuries have actually increased over the last decade or so. And let's again go back to wolves. Wolf populations still thrive in places like Alaska, and that poses a threat to humans. In fact, one of the most shocking wolf attacks happened in 2010. A 32-year-old school teacher named Candace Berner went out for a jog. Unfortunately, she never made it home. 4 men on snowmobiles found her body when they noticed trails of blood in the snow. An investigation later determined that wolves had chased Berner down, knocked her down, and badly wounded her. She then tried to crawl away, but then the wolves again got her. Investigators found a pool of blood 3 feet wide. Now, if Candace Berner had carried a handgun or some other firearm when she went out for her jog, maybe she'd be alive today. We will never know. But do you think I'm exaggerating about these risks? Well, remember, many people have used guns to repel wolf attacks. In fact, in one case, two wolves attacked an Alaskan man, but he killed them both with a pistol. This happens. Another time, a wolf attacked 2 young boys at a logging camp. One boy's father shot the wolf with his rifle. And in another case, a father shot a wolf he spotted running at his 7-year-old son. And in still yet another instance, 5 wolves charged at a married couple. The husband fired his rifle at point-blank range, killing the lead wolf. He then killed the second wolf. That forced the other wolves to retreat. And again, I will put in the comments below, in the description of this video below, I will put some of the links to these stories so you can check it out and make sure I'm telling you the truth, and you can use that for your own research and your own writings. But what if you don't live in Alaska, right? I just gave you some Alaska stories. What if you don't live in Alaska? Well, bears are still a problem and can be around the other parts of the United States. For example, in 2020, a bear killed a man who was backpacking in the Great Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. Several months later, another bear in the Great Smoky Mountains as well, this time in Tennessee though, attacked a 16-year-old girl. She was seriously hurt, but survived, thank God, because her family was able to chase off that bear. And remember those snakes? Don't forget about those snakes that terrified the early settlers. They're still around. You see, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, estimates that venomous snakes bite between 7,000 and 8,000 Americans every year, even now. So let's wrap up. The Second Amendment establishes distinct rights. The distinct right to keep, which means to have firearms, and also the distinct right to bear firearms, meaning the right to carry them outside in public, all of which, of course, is for self-defense. And now once you understand, which you now do, the threat of animal attacks in early America during our founding period, you really do understand yet another reason why the right to carry guns in public was so important to our founding fathers, those same men that wrote the Constitution, and of course, the Second Amendment itself. And of course, for most Americans today, wild animals probably don't pose the same acute threat that they may have in the founding period. But you're kidding yourself if you think that the threat does not exist today in the United States. That's just one of the many reasons why our founders were wise to enshrine a constitutional right to defend yourself with firearms. And if you doubt that, just ask the Americans who've been attacked by wild animals. So again, I hope you learned something today, and thanks for joining me here at the Four Boxes Diner, where we serve fresh, hot Second Amendment news and analysis. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and spread the word. So again, we'll see you next time here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.